So in this video, let's continue down this path, exploring influence and cult leaders and why humans have this strange habit of doing what other people tell them to do. And let's just jump right dramatically as we can and go to deadly dictators. And what I want to focus on in this video is how strange the 20th century was, how the defining characteristics of the 20th century was a massive expansion of thinking and really trying to disconnect itself from actual reality. So it was really a battle of ideas against reality. And you see this in France. In academia, you had postmodernism around the middle part of the 20th century. And it was such a clear war against reality because language and thinking were the only things that were real. There is no actual real world beyond language and thinking. And I've done a couple videos on postmodernism, but there's also the conflict of ideas that defined World War I, World War II, and how unique this was in and of itself. The 100 million people had died because of ideological conflict, and that superseded the numbers collectively in history of battling out ideas and deaths that resulted from that. But way far more stranger than any of this was the 250 million people that died at the hands of their own government. And that's really strange because if government is some kind of ideological tribalism, it should do everything to protect its own. But you saw those numbers, 250 million, far exceeding 100 million, dying at the hands of their own government. So how can we make some sense of this, and why did it come about when this war between ideas and thinking and reality became so intense? Well, one hint comes from a quote from one of the dictators, Stalin himself. And the way he put it is, one death is a tragedy, but 1 million deaths is a statistic. Now, what I want to compare and contrast there is the one death, which is tragic in reality. And then if you make that into the abstract, then you take all the living presence out of it and it becomes dull and lifeless. And then it becomes much more tolerable. And so, as I've talked about in my videos, this is the difference between thinking and consciousness. And you can taste your tea in the morning, and that's alive and present, because its consciousness is alive and present. But when you think about something, thoughts are these shadows of consciousness. They miss out. They're not alive, and you can't really experience them the same way you can with other actual conscious experiences. So in this sense, the 20th century wasn't a battle between different ideas. It was a battle between ideas themselves and conscious reality. And again, you saw this in the academic world where behaviorism was denying the very existence of consciousness. But I also want to read a quote from the book, because he looks at all these different dictators and tries to find a common thread that would explain how they were able to take the lives of their own citizens. And so I'm just paraphrasing some of this, but they shared, so all these individuals, these deadly dictators, they shared a malignant energy for the propagation of death and annihilation of the human spirit. And I think that was a really interesting way to put it, the human spirit. What a better way to phrase consciousness itself. So one of the things that I've been discussing is these left brain stories. Humans confabulate, which is to say the left brain creates story after story. And one way you can look at the 20th century and its continuation to the present day is this battle of ideas is a battle of left hemisphere stories that are mostly just confabulations that we believe. The greatest threat to these confabulations is the right brain devil's advocate, the skeptical right brain, the consciousness that can shed a light on any confabulation and see that it's just a story that's made up. And so in this sense, the madness of the 20th century was a way to try to extinguish the light of consciousness, which could see through all its stories and tales. But of course, this is ultimately impossible.